Charles Ponzi was once hailed as a financial genius, in charge of one of the most successful business investments in America. He had millions of dollars and crowds of people eager to give him their money. However, little did they know that Ponzi's business was built on lies and deception, a scam that made him rich but ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people. Even a century later, the scam still bears his name, the Ponzi scheme. But who was the man behind the scam? Ponzi was born in Italy to a hard-working postman, and his family was financially comfortable, but not as well off as his ancestors, who were successful merchants and public officials. This demotion affected Ponzi deeply, making him bitter and resentful. He felt that he should not have to suffer for his family's declining fortunes. He inherited a modest sum of money from his father, and used it to enroll in college, but instead of studying, he spent his money on lavish living and gambling. Eventually, Ponzi's greed and deception led to the downfall of his empire and the ruin of countless individuals. Ponzi's desire to live a life of luxury and wealth was just an illusion. When his inheritance money ran out and he had neglected his studies, he was faced with the reality that he had no chance of graduating. Rather than accepting a menial job, he chose to travel to America in search of wealth. But America proved to be a harsh wake-up call for Ponzi, as he struggled to find work, and often resorted to stealing and begging for food. He bounced from job to job, from sign painting to insurance sales, but was never able to hold on to a job for long. In 1907, Ponzi moved to Montreal, where he found work at a bank that mainly served Italian immigrants, Banco Zerossi. However, it was short-lived, as the bank was a scam and Ponzi's boss was using the money from new clients to pay off the older ones. This experience, combined with Ponzi's own struggles and desire for wealth, ultimately led to the creation of his infamous Ponzi scheme. In mid-1908, Ponzi found himself caught up in the investigation of the fraudulent bank where he worked. To avoid being implicated in the scandal, he stole a check and attempted to cash it, but was caught and sent to prison for 3 years. Upon his release, he attempted to smuggle Italian immigrants into the United States for profit, but was caught and sent back to prison for another 2 years. After being released for a second time, Ponzi found himself struggling to make ends meet. He took odd jobs, wandering from state to state, until he eventually landed a position as a clerk at an import-export business in Boston. He met and fell in love with a young woman named Rose Necco, and they got married in 1918. Despite his newfound happiness, Ponzi was determined to give his wife the extravagant lifestyle he felt she deserved. He quit his steady job and joined his father-in-law's wholesale fruit-selling business, in search of a new opportunity to make his fortune. Ponzi's attempt to save his father-in-law's struggling fruit business was unsuccessful, leading to its bankruptcy. He then tried to start his own import and export business, but it also failed, due to his lack of experience and contacts. Determined to make a success, Ponzi came up with the idea to start a trade magazine, called Trader's Guide, in which other companies would pay him to advertise their services. He believed it would bring in significant income, but reality proved otherwise. The magazine failed to attract any interest or advertising, and Ponzi was unable to secure a loan from the bank. He was forced to let go of his staff and sublet his office space to make ends meet. Despite these setbacks, Ponzi held on to his dreams and hoped that his next idea would be the one that would make him rich. In August 1919, Ponzi received a letter from Spain that sparked an idea for a new business venture. The letter included an international reply coupon IRC, which Ponzi saw as an opportunity for arbitrage by buying IRCs in one country, where the currency was weak, and redeeming them in another country, where the currency was stronger. He started a company called the Securities Exchange Company to handle this business, but soon realized that the profits from arbitrage of IRCs were too small to cover the costs of shipping them internationally. Despite this setback, Ponzi refused to give up on his idea and turned it into a Ponzi scheme, convincing others to invest in the IRC arbitrage business despite it not being a viable business model. Ponzi's scheme was a masterful manipulation of people's greed and financial vulnerability. He promised impossible returns in a short amount of time, with little to no risk, and convinced them to invest their money into his business. However, their money was never really invested. Instead, Ponzi used it to pay off returns to earlier investors, while keeping most of it for himself. The scam relied on a constant flow of new funds, and as soon as Ponzi couldn't find enough new investors, the con fell apart. His scheme was not only illegal but also morally reprehensible, as it ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people who were lured in by his false promises. Ponzi's actions were a stark reminder of the dangers of greed and the importance of financial literacy. Ponzi, a master of manipulation, understood that his true talent was not in finance, but in persuasion. He knew how to sell his business without appearing too eager or aggressive, making it seem as though it made no difference to him whether he got their money or not. He began with a small group of people in his own neighborhood and managed to convince 18 of them to invest in his business within the first month. As word spread and people saw the returns that others were getting, thousands began crowding the streets outside Ponzi's office, desperate to invest their own money in this seemingly surefire opportunity. As Ponzi's empire grew, he was finally able to live the life he had always dreamed of. He moved into a luxurious mansion, drove a fancy car, dressed in designer clothes, and went on lavish first-class trips. However, by the start of summer, less than 6 months after Ponzi launched his new venture, there were rumblings of doubt about his business. Initially, everyone was afraid to say anything, as Ponzi had successfully sued a financial analyst for libel, who had accused him of lying. But then the Boston Post, the same newspaper that once proclaimed Ponzi a genius, began investigating his operation. They brought in Clarence Barron, president of Dow Jones and manager of the Wall Street Journal, who quickly spotted the obvious scam. Ponzi tried to calm the concerns of government officials by cooperating fully and even promising to stop taking in new investments while he was under scrutiny. But he unknowingly sealed his own fate by hiring William McMasters as his publicist. Unlike Ponzi, McMasters was an honest man who soon realized that his client was a fraud. He collected evidence and went to the Boston Post, where he wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning expose detailing all of Ponzi's secrets. This time, the game was truly up and the Ponzi scheme collapsed. Several banks had to declare bankruptcy, tens of thousands of people lost their life savings, and Ponzi was indicted on 86 counts of mail fraud. He pleaded guilty to only one charge of mail fraud, and received a 5-year sentence. But even after serving his time, Ponzi couldn't resist the urge to scam again, and attempted to repeat the Ponzi scheme once more before finally being caught and deported to Italy. Ponzi, once a man brimming with confidence and charisma, found himself struggling to find success in his business ventures. Despite his self-proclaimed financial genius, he was unable to save a failing company, and his subsequent import-export business also failed. Desperate for a new opportunity, Ponzi came across the idea of using international reply coupons (IRCs) for arbitrage, buying them at a lower price in one country, and redeeming them for a higher value in another. He started the securities exchange company and promised investors huge returns in a short period of time, but the truth was the profits from the IRCs were too small to sustain his operation. When the legitimate business failed, Ponzi turned to a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay off returns to older investors. Ponzi's scheme was a success, and he was able to live the lavish lifestyle he always dreamed of. But as the Boston Post began to investigate his operation, the truth was exposed and Ponzi's empire crumbled. He was indicted on 86 counts of mail fraud, and served 5 years in prison. Upon his release, he attempted to start another scam in Florida, but it was quickly exposed. Facing the possibility of returning to prison, Ponzi fled to Italy and was eventually arrested in New Orleans. He spent the rest of his life in poverty, dying in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro and buried in a pauper's grave. His story serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of greed and financial naivety.